Hello students. In our last lecture we discussed about the story, that is the German refugee. But now, after having gone through the story of the displacement, the story about the mental suffering, the feeling of alienation and isolation, now the story that we see how drastically it resulted for the writer, uh, for the lecturer, and that is presented from the both points of view, the Gazana and the narrator. The story that we have gone through is is the story of a Jewish people, is the story of the suffering and the pains rendered by the fascist regime that that caused the havoc in the lives of the European people, Polish Jews, or entire Jew community. And that is what we have seen the last, the most hazardous that these Jewish people were exposed to because because of fault in the history, and that we see in the story. It's Oscar's apartment where he was he was living. The apartment, the themes that we see, it's the struggle to live in the alien country. It's the theme to get assimilated in the American lives, in the American civilization and culture, but entirely the whole culture and civilization is foreign to Oscar Gazana, and that is told to us in the narration by Martin Goldberg. So, we just need to go through what are the themes that we see in the literature, in the story that represents the Jewish literature. Theme of displacement. This is one of the story that we see the displacement in the form of the Jewish people, Jewish community, and it is a story represented in the form of Oscar Gazana and his so-called living for America, how he wounded up his family life, his domestic life, his so-called domestic usage and everything. But this displacement, his alienation from his wife, with no family around, with no friends around, no culture that belongs to him, it's typical in new society. He find it difficult to learn, even to get communicated, because he was speaking Yiddish language, that is Jewish language, which is definitely unintelligible to the American masses. The the English language he tries to attempt, or he attempted to learn, but he cannot cope with the words, the language, and this has caused and multiplied his theme of alienation, and it so overpowered him that he was keeping himself alone, isolated, and melancholic. All this feeling of alienation sends him into dejected mood, and that is what we see, that this dejection has caused him to escape Except the narrator, none was around him to fulfill his emotional needs. And that is what his its mental suffering. He was so sad and so alienated after the delivery of his first lecture, the financial crunch, and everywhere there is a difficulty in his living that has caused him to commit the suicide in his apartment. So this displacement has caused so many problems in the lives of Oscar Gazner that he thought that his life is worthless. He felt he cannot cope up with the American society, civilization, and culture, and that has caused him alienation. In the interlinked themes that we see is alienation. He feels so alienated. It is the element of his own psychology that he cannot cope up with. He was unfriendly. The entire environment, entire social environment, entire domestic environment, everywhere he is not finding his own plus. He is not coping with the significant life of his own that he will contribute to the society, that he will contribute to the American world. Even it cannot be understood. The language that we see in the form of so-called Yiddish language, but his attempt to learn even fewer sentences and the pronunciation habits and everything that has caused him to communicate, and that that this financial insecurity, this displacement, and all the problems in his all types of lives, he felt alienated. His friends and everyone, he's alone. He has chosen his own way, and that is what we see, that his alienation has caused him to commit the suicide. Of course, there is a financial security. Whatever he has earned the money by selling out his own things after he parted with his wife, the financial security is dwindled. He finds that he cannot cope up with the expenses here in living America. The atrocities that were rendered at home by Adolf Hitler, the Jews, like him, migrated to various parts of the world, including America. And this has, of course, Oscar Casanos sold off all his things and settled with anti-Semite white. She has also given both of them mutually understood each other and paved their own separate ways. So he got few things. He was so dejected that he cannot cope up with the expenses too. So everywhere the problems were multiplying. The the Jews, the feelings and the mental alienation caused in the Jewish people in America was such an impulse behind their living, the problems and alienation, that the Oscar Gazner story is the story of a fellow Jewish people. At the same time, we have seen there is the Nazis, the brutality that was rendered by Adolf Hitler, the despot, the fascist. He killed his wife. See, he was finding it very much humiliation. Another drive that Nazi's humility that we see was that he was his wife was killed. She was taken into a lorry and was shot in the head. The, the Nazis' brutality is such a heinous one that she was lying naked in the dead bodies of the male. Such a humiliation rendered to the body of a woman like his wife. This he cannot live with. This he cannot tolerate with. He cannot cope up with. And that humiliation caused him to commit the suicide that we see in the form of the story. So, like this, we have this particular story that we find in the German refugee. So, there are few questions that we need to discuss here. Is that about the character sketch of the narrator? Martin Goldberg is the character who is an English teacher. He is also a fellow Jewish, but he tried to educate, like Oscar Kastner, he had educated all other Jewish migrants who were living in America. But he finding that Oscar Kastner was not able to move as he intended. There was a pronunciation problems. There was none other than he could confide his sufferings and pain. But only Martin Goldberg he was very much closer to. So Oscar Kastner and Martin Goldberg were living. He provides us all the lives and detailed account of the sufferer Oscar Kastner, and that we see in the form of the story. Oscar Kastner is the central character, protagonist of the story. It is about him the story is being told. What happened to him? What were things? He was a lecturer. He was appointed as a lecturer visiting faculty in the public institute. He was preparing for a lecture to be delivered in English, but he finding it difficult to pronounce, to read, to write, to make him understandable to others. He has left his wife, his family behind. Frau Gassner, she was living in Germany. She was anti-Semite. She allowed him to move, and that is what we see, that the things that have turned out for both of them. But here in the foreign country like America, Oscar Kastner cannot cope up with, and that displacement, that mental suffering, that alienation has definitely devastated Oscar Kastner. So these are the fellow themes that we have seen that were discussed in the form of this character. So what are the themes if we discuss? Alienation, displacement and financial insecurity are dealt with. The atrocities of Nazis dealt with in the story. So the story brings us very much closer to us, to the Jewish suffering in the despotic and fascist nations, and how these nations were devastated, such as Poland, Auschwitz, that we see, and how the concentration camps and how the conditions of these concentration camps were. So we see all these features in the Jewish community literature. So we have this typically Jewish literature or literary themes that we have seen in this particular video. Thank you.